this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. You know the term serial killer? It's not something that's been around for a long, long time. Matter of fact, there's kind of a famous television show that's based on an equally famous book written by John Douglas, Mindhunter. And that book and the television show kind of explore the idea of the origins of that terminology. And it's kind of interesting, one of the episodes that kind of, bat this back and forth. What do you call somebody that commits, sequential killing? They landed, though, back then in the 70s on this term, serial killer. And many people have tried to define it. And there's a variety of different types of killers that are out there. You have mass killers, you have spree killers. And look, if we sat here long enough, we could probably make up a few of our own. I'm certainly positive that some academic somewhere is trying to construct some new narrative that will place their name in the pantheon of quote-unquote researchers into this type of behavior. But never at any point in time in my career or in my time covering cases have I ever heard of a serial killer that was responsible for just one death. Kind of an oddity, isn't it? Today on Body Bags, we're going to talk about a case from over 35 years ago. A case that involves a beautiful mama who died, left behind a 2-year-old daughter, and a guy that turns out to be the perpetrator that says he was, in fact, a serial killer, but only killed once. Coming to you from the beautiful campus of Jacksonville State University, I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. I love the word confounding, Dave. I don't have an opportunity to use it a lot, but I got to tell you, when I began to kind of read the story of Robin Lawrence and this journey that her case, because she can no longer take a journey, she's been dead now since 1994, but this journey of her case had kind of taken place. One of the things that was rather confounding is that a person that is now associated with her death claims that they were a serial killer, but they've only killed one person. Mm-hmm. Bit of a head scratcher, right? I mean, that's where,
it really
the term
is.
Confounding comes in here.
I started looking at it when you sent it to me because I thought, this is remarkable. I mean, another story, another case, and I mean this in the nicest way, and we apologize a lot for being flippant about some of the ways we sometimes refer to cases being fascinating or incredible or whatever. In this particular case, I think about a 2-year-old girl who grew up without her mother. On November 18th, 1994, a 37-year-old mother, married, was murdered in her home. She was murdered, Robin Lawrence was, in a violent and vicious way that she was stabbed 49 times and was not discovered for 2 days. Her husband was overseas at the time, and he was trying to get her on the phone, and he couldn't reach her. And so he finally calls a next-door neighbor and says, "Hey, would you go check on Robin? I can't get her on the phone." And so the neighbor goes over there on November 20th, 1994, about noon, 12:30, and she gets to the back door and sees that the screen has been ripped out, and she opens it. I can picture her calling out, "Robin, Robin." And little 2-year-old girl with a way loaded down diaper comes to the door. and greets her. And she's, well, where's your mommy? Where's your mommy? And she sees the blood, and she starts going through the house and finds 37-year-old Robin Lawrence dead. She immediately backs out of the house, grabs the child, and goes to a neighbor's and calls because she doesn't know how long, she doesn't know is the killer still in the house? I mean, you wouldn't know. I mean, if you see something like that for the first time, you don't know. But that's what we're talking about today, because that case, from that moment on November 20th, 1994, until recently, was an unsolved murder. Nobody knew. And I think about that 2-year-old girl.
Yep.
Not knowing her mother, really, other than what her friends and family told her about her mom.
Yeah.
I've got children in that age group. You have a son in that age group. I mean, we've got kids in this that we can identify with, and there were no answers for that daughter.
None whatsoever. Can you imagine? And, I think probably this is kind of embroidered with another level of fear. Can you imagine going through life and you know that your mama has been subjected to this level of brutality and violence? And maybe, just maybe, every night when you close your eyes, because you were actually there when it happened, you don't have a memory of it, but you were actually there when it happened. And I'm wondering, are you thinking that some horror awaits you just around the corner because that person could pop back into your life at any moment in time, because they're never caught? Dave, this case actually reminds me, and you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about here. You think about this particular case I'm going to mention, going back to 2018. 16. I'm thinking about the Piketon Massacre.
Oh, wow.
Which you and I covered extensively. And I've been on, a couple of things. I've been on KT Studios. Big shout out to our friends at KT on their podcast, the Piketon Massacre. I think we did 3 seasons of it. And, I was also on the documentary on Oxygen. That involved a small child. I don't know if you remember this, when the aunt came to the door at the home of one of the victims, and knocked on the door, and a small child answered the door, and the child looked at the grown woman standing at the door, and the grown woman said, Where's mommy and daddy? Because she'd gone to a previous house, and they didn't get an answer at the door. And the child looked into the eyes of this adult and said, Mommy and daddy are playing zombie. And, there was also a baby in the house there too that had been, lying in the blood, in between the two parents in the bed, that had been executed, shot multiple times. And both that child that was, to a certain degree, was able to communicate as best they could. It escapes me right now precisely the age of that baby. But, and their sibling, who was, a baby, was removed from the home. And, you think back to it, I don't remember things from when I was 2 or 3 years old. I think the earliest remembrances I might be when I'm 4, maybe. But this is something that's going to hang on you for the rest of your life, Dave. I mean, forever and ever, this is going to be with you, because you're going to be associated with that. You're going to be identified with that. Any kind of, just imagine if there's any family members that are around, every time they see you, they might not say it to your face, but every time they see you, you're going to be associated with that event. And they might look on you with pity. They might say, wow, they were very blessed or lucky, or however you want to frame it, that they weren't, that this child wasn't killed as well. Right. Here she is surviving all this time. And what a legacy, man.
Joe, and there's even more. Nicole, the little 2-year-old, when the neighbor, her name is Lori Lindbergh, Lori Lindbergh came and found Nicole, the baby. And she calls 911, but she rushes Nicole to the hospital because she didn't know. She knew she had been there and had experienced something, but didn't know exactly what. She knows that she's wearing a diaper that hasn't been changed in a long time. The child hasn't eaten or drank. She was dehydrated, and they did take care of that. But, the thing about Nicole is Nicole was very fragile. She had a liver transplant right after she was born. Oh. So she was not in the best of health on a daily basis. And this 2-year-old went without any kind of help for 2 days. And so there was some serious concern there. And thankfully, the neighbor knew that and got her she got her to help right away, or we could be looking at multiple deaths here.
Well, not only multiple deaths, but mind you, Dave, this goes back to my old assertion about, I always say the poem. I'm not going to do the same thing here, but the old poem about, for the want of a nail, a shoe was lost, and one of a shoe, a horse was lost, message, and so forth and so on. If that child, just folks listening to me, if that child had died as a result of this, brother, that's a double homicide there, right. Because that child's death, or that child's life, let's put it this way, right, is directly dependent. Their life, their existence is directly dependent upon survival of the parent. The fact that child survived, particularly being in such fragile health, my Lord, a liver transplant in and of itself. And look, child's 2 years old, Dave. You're not that far downrange from this event that has taken place. Oh. The child is still fragile, all right, and probably was fragile. And just from a physical standpoint, right, not to mention what has occurred in the wake, the absence of this loving mother, that took care of her.
Medication when you get a transplant? Yeah. You have to take immunosuppressors. Is that what they're called?
Yeah, there's a whole battery of things that you have to take just to make sure, first off, that the transplant is going to be viable, right, and then to get your system back online. Wow. This is the event itself is so invasive, and we are, in a position, our liver literally, it controls so many aspects to our survivability. It's a rather resilient organ, but the fact that, this liver was compromised to the point where they felt the need that she required a transplant. Such fragile health, and also there are circumstances down the road, throughout life. These children, anybody that has gone through a liver or any kind of organ transplant, they have to be monitored very, very carefully. This is not something like you're going to run down to the doc in the box, the GP, where they're right, going to say, hey, how are you doing? That sort of thing. No, you're going to have to go to a clinic. You're going to have to go to a hepatic specialist that can follow you and continue to pull labs and do all this stuff and just kind of, watch you as you develop. And who does that? Well, it's mama, right?
Always mom. Always.
Yeah, it always is. Dad is there. Dad provides, but mama's the caretaker. Mama's the lover, in the family. She's the one that makes everybody feel secure, wraps your arms around. She's the one that you go to, when you're crying and you need care and compassion and all those sorts of things. She's also the one to make sure you make it to the doctor's appointment, right? Because I can tell you, as an old hand at being a daddy, I can't remember that stuff. It's something that I was always working. It's not something, don't ask me to remember an appointment. I can't remember, I've got a graduate assistant. It's like, I have to ask her all the time now. It's like, what am I teaching on today? So don't ask a dad to do it. It's a mom that does it. And the fact that this precious little angel was robbed by, and I'll go ahead and say it, by an agent of Satan himself that showed up in that house that night and drove that knife into this mother's body over and over and over again, and allowed that 2-year-old to remain in that house, not knowing what would become of her. This is the definition of pure evil. 49 times, Dave. 49 times. There's overkill, then there's overkill. Mm-hmm. You start to get above, I think personally, you start to get into double-digit numbers. You're overkill at that point in time, but 49 times that this blade was driven into this mother's body. And then there are no answers. And I can tell you the scene, you mentioned, and we've talked about on Body Bags, we, use the term finder, and they're an interesting group of people. They really are, when it comes down to those individuals. It's not cops. It's certainly not me. It's civilians that are just minding their own business, going through life, doing their thing. The population of people, if there could be a study, and maybe there is a study out there, and any of my academic friends that are listening, I urge you to explore this segment of the population. Those individuals that are the finders of dead bodies. Can you imagine going into that house and, observing that horror? Because I was just lecturing yesterday to my intro forensics class, and we're doing a serology DNA section right now here in fall semester at Jack State, and I'm into the DNA, kind of introducing the students to this. But I start off with serology, which is the study of blood, and that's where most DNA scientists, they come from a background in serology. And I was talking about, generally blood is considered to be the most recognizable, I think, to the general public, the most recognizable type of evidence that we think about in death investigation. And to be there in that environment, looking at this trail of blood that winds up leading back to this mother's remains. I think one of the things, and this is rather gruesome, but I'm going to go ahead and say it because, we have to talk about these things. I'm wondering how many times this child went back and forth to mama's remains. Oh. Because the child knows where mama sleeps. The child is, and there's nothing more precious in the world, is there? That when you have a baby, and I miss those days. I really do. I'm not saying I miss the tears, mm-hmm. but I miss those little arms reaching up to me, wanting me to comfort them. Okay. And how much more so with a mother. But that child wandering through that house with that dirty diaper, going back to her remains every single time, the body getting colder and colder, that blood getting tackier and tackier. To really kind of lace this up, I'm wondering, were there bloody little footprints on the surface of that floor? Were there contact traces of blood on the wall where the child had touched mom? Smears, down at child level mm-hmm. on the wall, the child crying aimlessly, wanting to be comforted, dirty diaper, nothing to drink. There's no bottle for the child. There's no water in a sippy cup. There's no animal crackers. There's nothing. There's just silence in this house. You begin, and many times for us that go out on scenes like this, you start to think about, the only thing you can think about, really, you become obsessed with it, is I want to hold somebody responsible. I want to do everything that I can. And you try not to treat cases differently, Dave, but when you walk into a horror show like this and you see these things, it all of a sudden really intensifies your ability to focus, I think. There are cases, and I'll admit to it, there are cases out there that, as a practitioner, I was more focused on because of, I don't know if it's that little flame of anger that stirs up in your soul or whatever it is. It's like, I want to make sure somebody's held responsible for this. So evidence in this case, I think, and I'm sure that many of the investigators back then, during this period of time, back in 94, they wanted to put somebody's feet to the fire in this. But the fact that that this thing was cold for so long, everything that they did back in 94 turns on what happens eventually in the future with this case, Dave.
Joe, you mentioned footprints from a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
You know what they did find? The detective on the scene that day that took all the photos and, went into it was an active scene, but there was an activity going on. You had the body of the deceased, and what they did find, they found tissues. They found little tissues around the body that had blood on them. And the detective believes that little Nicole, at 2 years old, she knew what blood was because, moms used tissues and Band-Aids to clean up blood. And the detective thinks, based on where they found these tissues and how many they saw, that little baby was trying to stop the blood. But even more than that, we mentioned that, she was dehydrated. She had no food, no nothing, okay? But one thing they did find all around Robin's body, empty baby bottles. And because of where they were placed, the detective thinks that 2-year-old Nicole was trying to get food for her mother, trying to wake her up, that she was trying to tend to the injuries and trying to get her to, that was all she could think to do, And I'm thinking, that's a 2-year-old that is just a superhero to do that. And that's what, was amazing about this incredible scene here. But look, the injuries, the detective says that he believes that Robin was attacked in her bed and that she fought her way out of that bed, that she fought hard. He went on and said that there were a number of things that stood out. The phone cord had been cut. And this is somebody who came in to do the devil's work. You mentioned that at the very beginning. And so cut the phone cord and then let the killing begin, apparently, because 49 wounds from a knife, Joe, that's going to be, I know that they mentioned one of the cuts on the neck was a gaping wound. If you're in a frenzied type of attack, and I'm sure you've seen these, what does somebody look like when they've gone through a fight? You know how exhausting it is just to throw punches in a fight? If you've ever been in a real fight that was emotional, and you're worn out after 2 minutes. For somebody to be stabbed that many times, to put up that kind of fight, I just cannot imagine what the detectives walked into and what that 2-year-old walked in.
It would have been on the part of the perpetrator. It would have been incredibly exhausting. The only thing I could really think about, anytime I think about a frenzied killing like this, I don't think about somebody that is necessarily out of their mind in the sense that they're having a psychotic break. I'm thinking about somebody that is stimulated by something. Now, you can be stimulated by multiple things. Okay, obviously, you can take on some kind of substance, perhaps a mind-altering substance, but I think something that hardens you to the point where you're pushed beyond your limits. I'm thinking coke, meth, those sorts of things. I'm not looking at this and thinking heroin addict, all right. Something that's going to kind of drive you down. I'm thinking about somebody, and there's also another way that you can be stimulated, and that's a frenzied sex attack. And that's, it's the ultimate stimulant to a certain degree, particularly if somebody is fixated on a victim. And I find it interesting, the fact that the trouble that an individual would have had to have gone to in order to do something like cutting a phone line, that goes to something you and I talk about, right? We talk about premeditation,
right?
And planning, I think. And again, knowing that, you know that you're not dealing with somebody that is, in a classic sense, that are has lost their marbles, if you will, that are completely disoriented to time and space and all those sorts of things. You're thinking about somebody that's being, I hate to use this term, but they're thoughtful about it, but not thoughtful in a compassionate way. They're thinking about it. They've worked this out in their brain. How can I achieve this? And my end game is I'm not just doing this to take her life. I'm doing this probably from the perspective that I'm sexually motivated by it. Something is attractive to this individual about the victim. And, and also here's something else that's real key. Who would, in fact, have knowledge that she's a single mama, that she's all alone? Because you had mentioned that this mama was absent her husband, that daddy's gone.
He was overseas. He's traveling.
Deployed.
Right.
He's deployed overseas right now. So who's going to have that inside knowledge, right? Who's going to be aware that she's going to be there all by herself? Here's one other thing. Sometimes I think that single mothers in particular, I don't mean, I'm not disrespecting their marriage. And when I say single, I'm just saying a mother alone with a child. Some people will say, I think that, woe be unto the person that crosses a mother that has a child and she's trying to defend them. However, I think that women with children become a more vulnerable target because women with children might be so inclined to give in to the request of some sadistic animal that shows up on their doorstep, as long as you don't hurt my baby. And I think that some of these predators understand that. They kind of plug into that and want to try to utilize that as leverage to get what they want. But in this case, you've got a subject that's here that's going to try to, not just fulfill some kind of sick fantasy, but they're going to be there to try to rip her to shreds. What does that say about the subject, that's doing this? Because, one of the things that we look for in a case like this from a forensic standpoint is, first off, we want to understand the weapon that is used. We want to understand, is this a weapon that is foreign to this domicile? It's not part of the kitchen, like the kitchen array.
Like the person showed up with the knife.
Yeah, and we want to know that. And does it marry up with anything else that might be in the household? Well, if they show up with a knife, again, Dave, preparation, right? And then what areas of the body are insulted at this point? Is this somebody that is doing disfigurement? Because that shows, for many, they'll say that shows some kind of personal issue with a person. I've had folks that have had knives inserted into eyes. I've had people that have had, much like if you've ever, you remember the Heath Ledger Batman movie where his cheeks, the actor's cheeks have been cut on both sides. I've had that happen. I've had lips that have been removed, foreheads cut. I've had ears I've never had ears totally removed, but I've had ears sliced off or partially sliced off. And then you got these other things that occur too, where they're actually attacking the sexual, those areas of the body that are identified with sexuality, like with women, the breast. I've had partial, I don't know how to say it, evisceration, if you will, of the female sexual organs where the uterus is partially removed. I've had things inserted into victims. The buttocks attacked. There was one case I was just talking about the other day where a guy tortured a lady in a bathtub, and I was showing these crime scene images to my class where the buttocks was attacked, and she had been drowned, homicidally drowned in a bathtub. And the interesting thing about it, Dave, is that her buttocks was stabbed multiple times, and guess what? Those injuries on the buttocks were absent any kind of hemorrhage. That was all done post-mortem. And so, you look at this, and the people that do profiling and everything, when we, assess these injuries, they'll take that data from these assessments and they'll say, oh, okay, well, this begins to fit some kind of pattern, some kind of template that they have set out, when we talk about serial perpetrators and sexually motivated things like that. And they'll look for these little points of identification along the way. In Robin Lawrence's case, I'm fascinated by the specific area of the injuries. We're talking about a gaping neck wound that we know of and generally when you hear gaping neck wound, yes, that can be facilitated with a stab wound, but most of the time, anytime you hear gaping associated with sharp force injury, those are most often associated with incised wounds like slices as opposed to stabs. Now, you can have stabs, and this is really horrific, but you can have stabs where they keep the knife in place and they will work the knife back and forth in the wound. Okay, and that does happen. But when you get a gaping event and you have a slice, I don't, and forgive me, I don't know if I've talked about this before. I think I probably have, but it bears mentioning again. You'll get these really irregular, nasty wounds when surgeons, for instance, are doing surgery. Okay, did you know that our bodies have contour lines? Our bodies do. They have contour lines, and these are called lines of Langer. And so, if anyone, particularly old school people that have ever had an appendix removed, there's the incision. They do it laparoscopically now, but the incision, it was called a McBurney incision. If you look at it, it runs. It kind of runs contrary to where the appendix is positioned. You think, well, that's kind of an odd scar how it's positioned because I know anatomically where the appendix is. Well, the reason they make the incision that way is that they're actually following the lines of Langer. Look, don't believe me. Go and look this up. You can do a Google search. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Just put in lines of Langer, human body, and you'll see these contour lines. So most surgeries that physicians do, with surgical tools, scalpels and those sorts of things, they will follow the lines of Langer. If they don't follow the lines of Langer, you get these real grotesque injuries because you're literally going against the grain of the body. So it pulls apart. That's why when people have these disfiguring injuries and they survive them, if you're blunt force impact where you get these nasty lacerations, the skin separates in an odd way. It doesn't follow the contour line. Or if somebody has been sliced against the lines of Langer, again, these injuries are wide and gaping and really nasty looking. They're very hard to close for emergency room physicians, by the way, or surgeons that have to attend to them. So people don't think about that. They don't. A lot of people will say, well, they were just cut to pieces, and you can go out and you can see injuries on individuals that are sliced up at a scene, and it just so happens that the perpetrator kind of fell within the parameters of the lines of Langer, and the injuries will not look as grotesque. But you can have somebody that is stabbed or cut maybe one or two times, and it'll be one of the nastiest injuries you've ever seen because it goes completely against the grain of the body. So, you think about this, and with 49, trust me, you're not going to be following the contours of the body. These things are going to be grotesque. They're talking about this gaping injury on the neck. It would not surprise me. But here's the thing. When you're involved in this type of violence, I can almost guarantee, just like old Lacard said many years ago, you are going to leave a trace behind. My contention is if you're going to perpetrate this kind of homicide that was perpetrated on Robin, you got to know something about her. I've gotten to a point in my life now where I do not believe in coincidences. I no longer believe that, most of the time I do not believe that there are going to be some dark unseen forces that are going to appear out of nothing on your doorstep. Most of the time, in most of these cases, there's going to be some, I don't know, for lack of a better term, some knowing going on, if you know what I mean, Dave.
I thought it was fascinating. This crime taking place in 1994. And if you remember back to that year, that's the year of the Nicole Simpson, Ron Goldman murders.
Yes, it was. I always, always, you know what? I always get confused about that. I get confused for some reason because it seemed like so much stuff happened back then.
Right.
I always get confused about the date of that double homicide and the date of the trial.
Right.
Because both of them were like a big deal.
Right.
So I get the two things conflated, I think. Yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. No,
it was June 94. And, there was a lot of blood on scene. And as the year went on and they talked about evidence and things like that, it became something, that was talked about. And as they were talking about the trial, the upcoming trial of the century, that blood evidence would play a big part. And they brought in, I remember them bringing in these DNA experts early on, and it was in the news. Yep. And so as this crime takes place and they've got 49 wounds, knife wounds, and they're looking for evidence they can use, I have to imagine that the detectives on the scene had to be thinking along those lines that we've got this. It was still very early on in what we now learn of DNA. But they did have, it was in the news. People did know about it. And I think they were probably, I'm hoping, schooling themselves as they were going and looking for any piece of evidence. And in this case, a detective is looking in the bathroom and something catches his attention, a towel, a bath towel. And it's on the rod that goes to the shower, And this is the difference between a detective and everybody else. And I think of you as a detective, Joe, because of how you have to work scenes as well. You guys don't take anything for granted. It's like everything there could lead to solving this case. And this detective saw it appeared to be a washcloth with a little stain on it, a small brownish stain that, if you're looking for a big red blotch of blood, that's not what it looks like. It does tend to look different than what one would expect. And that small brownish stain on that washcloth was not discarded.
No, hang on. Let me tell you one more thing, because we're dealing with time here.
Right.
Think about if you've ever seen, just imagine this. Have you ever seen, like, just in your own household, I certainly have, where, I don't know, for dudes, I guess it's one, you cut yourself shaving, right? And when you cut yourself shaving, you focus on the cut, right? And maybe you get a piece of tissue paper you put on your face. What you don't follow up on or remember is that now blood has fallen away from your body and it's landed on some kind of surface, or perhaps, just like in this case, you've grabbed a cloth or you grabbed tissue and you've placed it there and you pull it away and you drop it in the trash can. Dave, that blood is not going to appear 2 days later like it did when it initially happened. And you're right, it is brown. I've talked, that's why I always tell my kids, the students, I was like, you never call something blood. Right. You can say maybe it appears like it might be blood, but I don't know, because Dave, I've been fooled. I've actually seen melted chocolate at scenes, and I thought that it was blood, and it wasn't blood. It was melted chocolate. And that does in fact happen. I've actually, the worst are rust stains. Rust. Wow. If you pay attention, there's certain shades of rust. Wow. There's certain shades of rust out there. When you see it, you have to do a double take, because you're thinking, wait, is that blood? Now you need to sample it. You need to have the technician come and take a sample of it, because again, you don't know. You don't know until it passes through the rigor of testing. All right. But the fact that, and I love the fact that you brought it up about this detective again, all these years ago, 1994, brother, he spotted it, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And he grabbed it. And that's why, that's the reason we actually are talking about this case today, is because that detective did his job and then some. Everybody involved in this case, from what I've been, ever since you gave it to me, it kind of caught me in such a way, because it's such a remarkable thing to me on multiple levels. But a cold case that gets solved. And, in this particular case, the victim's mom and dad, she was 37 when she was killed. When Robin was killed, she was 37, has a 2-year-old daughter. Nicole, of course, is still alive. But her dad is still alive. He's 101 years old, and he was able to see this get solved after 37 years. He didn't. After 34
How many of
years,
these cases have you and I covered that were cold and are now solved? Where we have people say, I just wish her mother was here to see that this had been solved. Yeah. Or I just wish that dad was still here to see this solved. My Lord, how old is this guy?
101 years old. And he lived to see the day. He lived to see the day that this case was solved. And it's because the detective did not take that for granted. But tell me what happened next after this brown stain on a hand towel. At the time, you're not going to be able to do that much with it. You can get DNA off of it, which they did. They did pull DNA. They got a sample, and they ran it through the database. But, Joe, in 1994, what kind of database did we have for DNA?
Shallow at best. Shallow. And back then it was more of a, let's see, if you're looking at the utility of DNA back then, you're not necessarily going to go to a database because it was, again, shallow. You're doing it more of a true comparison, like a comparative analysis, right? Where you're trying to understand who the person might be if you get a suspect that you can compare to, as opposed to it was almost like I think that's one of the reasons that for years and years DNA was referred to as DNA fingerprinting, because that's the way fingerprinting was used. It's kind of the science of it is much more complex, but when you think about it, comparing the two, you think about, well, gee whiz, it's a we have the DNA, but what are we going to compare it to? There's nothing out there. We don't really have an existent database, to plug in. And, you think about the CODIS system, and forgive me because off the top of my head, I can't remember when it was initially established, but it's just because you have a swimming pool dug in your backyard, it doesn't mean anything if it doesn't have water in it. And so if you think about the water with samplings or the people that are out there, the pool is very shallow, right? And now, not only is it full, but nowadays, when you think about the utility of IgG with, investigative genetic genealogy, suddenly, to continue this metaphor, you need to expand the parameters of your pool because now it's washing over the sides.
Oh, my goodness.
Because we've now, you've unleashed this gulf of data that's potentially out there that you can kind of plug into, which is kind of fascinating.
There was something incredible about this because it doesn't usually happen like this, but Parabon Nanolabs is a DNA technology company that actually is in that same geographic area that this took place. But I actually saw, as they were breaking down, this, the DNA, and they were trying to develop a lead. I mean, still working on it. And they actually were able to put together what they believe this person would have looked like.
Yeah, it's called phenotyping. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. They did that. And I've seen the pictures. And oh my goodness. Yeah. It looked like a photo of,
phenotyping is, and phenotyping gets lost now. I mean, they do it, but it's like with IgG, that's the rage. It's I don't know what's the term. It's cachet. So right. With phenotyping though, if you're a real nerd, kind of like, and I proudly count myself in that host of nerds out there. Phenotyping's kind of cool because you go in and you begin to pick up on predisposition relative to DNA traits that have passed down. And it's not just passed down from your family, but they isolate these markers along the strand that can do things like predict eye color, skin tone, height, facial structure, hair color, all of these sorts of things. And they, and for years and years, we're kind of, and listen, all due respect to all of my friends out there that are composite sketch artists, and they do fantastic work.
Based on what they're told.
You're right. But when you can have phenotyping, it's essentially God's code, if you will. All right. You have access to this and you can plug this data in. And suddenly, like you said, you were amazed by this. I've seen several of these things.
Yeah.
And it just kind of burst on the scene, right? It's like, holy smokes. And when you see the person that's actually compared to, to the template that was created from the phenotyping, it's kind of striking, man.
And they actually, the cold case detectives that took this over, they started doing all the work we have seen happen before. And they ended up in 2019, they began the process of trying to find the killer. And they were able to as I mentioned, Paragon Nanolabs working with this and building out the background to figure out the family, the genetics and everything else that went into it. And Joe, they were actually able to find, and we're talking a needle in a haystack, because the one thing that you said when you started the show, a serial killer with one victim. And when you have somebody, a criminal, you don't expect them to start off with a homicide that is this grotesque, this frenzied attack. You would think there would be other crimes leading up to it, and you would have a pattern before this happened, and then it wouldn't stop. It would go on. I don't know how you go beyond what happened to Robin here, but but this ended up being a needle in a haystack. It was a one-off by a person with no criminal record at all.
Yeah. And you're right. You've got this subject, and I'll go ahead and name him. And he was a soldier at the time, just like Ollie, Robin's husband. This guy was a soldier. And remember, I talked about connectivity, and I talked about our awareness and being able to target people and all these sorts of things. And when you're, and he was posted at a place called Fort Myer, which is in the Arlington area, around, Northern Virginia. Fort Myer is not one of these massive bases, that we have. If you look at some of these places that we have, around the country where our troopers are billeted, he was living in the barracks at the time. And I've thought about this. At what point in time did he cross paths with her? Did she go to the PX? Because if you're on active duty, right, and people that don't know, I'm just going to tell you, it's one of the upsides of, being part of a military family is, well, they deserve it. You can go to PX and you get a lot better deals on things, like your groceries. You can get things, like you can get your gas. Well, you used to get your gas really inexpensively, on post. It's not necessarily the same as it used to be. And, there's other things that you have access to that you would not otherwise have access to. So that community is kind of small. And I'm really wondering, had this perpetrator, this Stephen Smirk, had he been pushing a grocery cart in the PX at some point in time? Did he look across the aisle and his eyes fell on Robin? Did he look at her to see that precious little girl, maybe in the seat of a buggy? That's what we call them down south, grocery buggies, right? Pushing along. Did he have that kind of awareness, to see her, to watch her, to develop some kind of lust after her? He left behind his DNA because Dave, and this has happened in other cases as well, he cleaned up. He cleaned up at the house. He admits to this because he's rolled over on this now. As a matter of fact, he's been sentenced to 70 years in prison. He was what, 22 years old when this occurred? He rolled over on this and confessed to the police. Now, there's two things that are said. Initially, it was said that he was a serial killer and he killed one. He told the cops that if it wasn't. Now, here's the thing that really makes me angry about this. Stephen Smirk actually makes comment about his own family. This guy says that if it hadn't been for my wife and my children, I would have become a serial killer. Guess what? Robin and Ollie had a child. She's never going to see her mama again. This guy had the option of living an entire life now because he's in his 50s.
He's 53.
He has admitted to this. He has been convicted of it, and he's been sentenced to 70 years in the penitentiary. Now, if they do what they say they're going to do with this guy, and there's no possibility of parole, there's a chance that he is going to die in prison. However, there's somebody else serving a prison sentence, not of her own making. And that's Nicole. She's going to have to bear this burden the rest of her life because of decisions that this animal made to rob the world of a mama who loved her kid, robbed her of a relationship that she would have had where she could have brought her babies to her mama to be held and comforted when they cried. I hope that she has no memory. I hope that she has no memory of that night. I hope that it's something that maybe through the mercy of God was spared. But I do know this. He's off the street. And this is one more thing I'm hoping for. I hope that they have his DNA, which they obviously do. And I hope that they stay on the case with this guy, because anybody that would use the term serial killer, I'm just wondering, if there are any other cases out there. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.